Welcome to the second episode of the HSBC Navigator series. I'm Divi Gopalan, and with me today is Stuart Tate. He's the Regional Head of Commercial Banking in Asia Pacific for HSBC. And today we'll be talking about digitization and how some companies are using that to move ahead in this pandemic. So my first question to you is, with much of the world still in a lockdown, how have the ways of doing business changed? They've changed very dramatically. You use the phrase digitisation, and we're right at the forefront of that with our customers. We in trade finance alone, we handle at least 100 million pieces of paper every year. That's an incredible amount of paper. It's incredibly inefficient. And what the pandemic has done is accelerate people's need, the requirement to be able to digitize, turn that information that's on the paper into digital form and get it into the channels where we can communicate with each other much better. So to give you an example, we've had an 88% increase in the level of digital communication with our clients in trade finance in Asia just in the past few months. And that continues, and we expect it to continue for quite some time. And what companies are realizing when they operate through digital channels, digital platforms, they can actually get much closer to their customer. They can interact much more effectively. In many cases, we're seeing middlemen being squeezed out, and that's something that some companies need to be very aware of. Because they're closer to their customer, they can interact much more effectively. They know the customer better. They can predict their behavior. They can understand their emotions. They can change the products. They can change the way they sell. And obviously, one of the biggest changes we're seeing through all the digitization is far, far higher levels of selling on e-commerce platforms. And that's something, again, that we expect to continue for quite some time. You talk about it accelerating something that was already happening, but would you say that it was quite a natural shift in that end, or was there much resistance to it? Well, it was a bit of both. It was a natural shift, but I think for many of us it was moving far too slowly. And it was obviously going to take quite some time had this event not occurred. And so one of the positives that we see coming out of this is that acceleration. I mean, not only does it put a company much closer to their customer, it can, of course, reduce costs. And I think one area that can be overlooked is it can reduce risks. And there can be a lot of operational risk for a company dealing in paper. Having it digitized makes it far safer. And this is where areas like blockchain come into play. And here at HSBC, we've been leading the development of blockchain, particularly in trade finance. And it's something we'd like to progress with our customers. Now, for many people who will be watching this and listening to this, it is quite natural for retailers perhaps to go online very quickly, and it's an easier move for them. But as far as other sectors, was there much of a shift, a quick shift, or was there a lot of exploration and trying to understand how they can make that move? Well, I think one of the clearest sectors and perhaps most surprising sectors where we've seen a change is in real estate. I mean, there are examples now in our customer base, and we see in the public domain where individuals are buying apartments here in Asia without actually visiting the apartment. The quality, the level of information, the visual of an apartment block is enough for people to commit to buying an apartment online. Now, typically they'll know the developer, there's a high degree of trust. The other counterparties that are involved, the banks, the lawyers, all come together in a way that the entire transaction can be done digitally and without actually seeing the premises. So I think when it comes to home buying, if that can be done on platforms like this, then the sky's the limit, really. Okay, I'm glad you brought up real estate. One of the effects of this pandemic was the spurring on the work from home culture. What do you think the impact of that will be, not only on those companies, but for the wider economy? Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think, virtually all companies now are looking at how they can reduce their real estate footprint, have less space, save cost, but at the same time, put in place working arrangements that suit the employees of today. Now, that obviously requires good IT infrastructure, good systems, good employees, because there is a level of trust. But companies are much, much more now looking at remote working.
The customers we talk to are typically not saying that they expect their employees to work from home permanently or work remotely permanently, but perhaps 1 or 2 days a week or during a day. It'll be a mixture of coming into the office, talking to a client, visiting a client, and then potentially working from home. So it can be mixed in that way. But certainly the real estate companies that have office space are having to look very carefully at how they put that space into the marketplace.
And if you had to pinpoint any markets that can be seen as kind of the leaders in this trend?
Well, if there's three, according to the Navigator survey, if there were 3 countries to call out, they would be Malaysia, India, and mainland China. And these were 3 markets that went into a very full lockdown and quite extended, especially in the case of India. And that's where companies had to respond very quickly, very comprehensively to operating in a remote way. So those are perhaps 3 countries that really stand out.
And if you had to maybe do a little bit of analysis or dig a bit deeper, what do you think is it that about these countries or that made them or allowed them to have such a speedy reaction and be able to absorb the change in such a way that they could overcome it?
Well, if we take the example of mainland China is leading the world in electronic payments and how people pay each other. And so I think that mindset, that way of doing business, that one aspect of doing business is so embedded, so developed, so successful that it enables companies to respond in other parts of their business when they're required to work remotely in this way.
Well, it's great that going digital seems to be an answer to many of the challenges of the pandemic. There is also a question about risk, how opening yourself up in cyberspace and using technology to communicate and do things digitally.
No, I think that's a really good point. Obviously companies are moving information in digital form, they're sharing it far more than before, and that's all very good for business. But there is a risk with that, and the risk is cybercrime. And I think we were a little bit surprised from the Navigator report that companies weren't putting cybersecurity and the defense against cybercrime higher up the agenda when we were asking them questions about what they were most focused on. So from our perspective, it is something that companies need to be aware of. We do see cyber attacks of companies of all sizes, in all locations, in all industries. We spend $4.5 billion US in 2019 on IT, and a good portion of that, unfortunately, goes on cybersecurity. But it's a very smart, very sensible move for companies to make as they increasingly do business in a digital way.
Stuart, great to talk to you. We've been talking about digitization. Thank you very much, Stuart.
Thank you.